My name is Lisa. I'm 20, 2 years old, and this is a piece of my heart I've never spoken out loud before. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think anyone would understand. I used to think that silence was the loudest thing in the world, until I learned that loneliness can scream louder than any silence ever could. Back then, I would wake up every morning and feel the weight before I even opened my eyes. Not just physical weight, but something deeper, a heaviness in my chest, like sadness was pressing down, daring me to fight back. Most days I didn't. I let it win quietly, while pretending everything was fine. That's what I was good at, pretending. I lived in a small apartment in a city that never seemed to notice me. People passed by in waves, always in a hurry, always with somewhere better to be. I would watch them from my window, wondering what it felt like to be seen, to be known. I'd scroll through photos of people laughing, arms wrapped around each other, eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that made you feel something just looking at it. I wondered if they ever knew what it felt like to sit in a room full of people and still feel completely alone. When I was younger, I thought things would change as I got older. I thought maybe I'd grow into someone brave or interesting, but 20, 2 felt like a number with no meaning. I had no one to call when something good happened. Worse, I had no one to call when everything fell apart. I would sit on the edge of my bed, hugging my knees, asking questions into the air that no one ever answered. What's wrong with me? Why doesn't anyone stay? I didn't even realize how guarded I had become. I smiled when I needed to, nodded when I was expected to agree, laughed when it was polite. But it was all empty. I was just going through the motions, keeping myself hidden behind a wall I didn't know how to tear down. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself it was safer to be alone than to be disappointed again. It wasn't always that way. There were moments in the past when I thought I had found people who cared. But they left, slowly, then all at once. Some left without warning. Some stayed just long enough to leave deeper marks. Every time someone walked away, they took a part of me with them. I got quieter, smaller, and eventually I stopped expecting anything good to stay. One night, I came home to a message on my phone. Just a few simple words. I hope today was kind to you. It was from someone I barely knew, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. I stared at it for a long time, not because it was grand or romantic, but because it was unexpected, because it didn't ask for anything, because it saw me in a moment I didn't even realize I was invisible. That small message cracked something open. Not enough to let everything in, but enough to remind me what it felt like to matter, even just for a second. I didn't respond at first. I didn't know how. I was afraid to believe it meant anything. But it lingered in my chest longer than I wanted to admit. The days that followed weren't magically better. I still woke up with the same heaviness, still moved through hours that felt endless. But something had shifted. I started noticing tiny things. A stranger holding the door, a barrister remembering my name, a smile from someone passing on the street. These moments weren't loud, but they were real, and real mattered more than loud ever could. I started writing again, nothing big, just little notes to myself, reminders, you're allowed to feel this, you're not broken, you're still here. I didn't believe them all the time, but I wrote them anyway. Sometimes believing comes after the writing. For a long time, I thought love had to come wrapped in grand gestures. But I've learned that sometimes it comes quietly, through kindness, through someone noticing you when you've spent years trying to disappear, through eyes that don't look away when you're at your worst. Loneliness is still a familiar shadow. I won't pretend it's gone, but it doesn't scream as loud anymore. because now I know what it feels like to be seen, not for who I pretend to be, but for who I really am. And that changed everything. I used to smile so easily. In photos at work, with strangers in coffee shops. My face knew exactly how to stretch into something warm, something harmless, something convincing. People would say I looked happy, that I had this light in me. I would nod, say thank you, and tighten the corners of my mouth a little more, just to make sure no one saw what was underneath. But what they didn't know, what no one ever really knew, was that every smile came with a cost. Every one of them was covering something up. Not just bad days or passing sadness, but deeper things. The kind that you carry for years and never quite know how to explain. Pain that didn't always have a name, only a weight. It started so young, the hiding. You learn fast that people don't always know what to do with your hurt. That even when you try to open up, they look away, or they listen but forget. Or worse, they tell you you're being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. So I learned how to tuck it all in and let my face do the work. A smile was safer than truth. A smile didn't make anyone uncomfortable. There were moments, of course, when I wanted to be honest, when I wanted to say, I'm not okay. But every time I tried, the words got stuck. I was afraid that if I said them out loud, they would confirm everything I feared about myself, that I was weak, broken, unworthy of real care. So I kept smiling. I smiled through disappointment, through rejection, through long nights lying awake with questions I couldn't answer. I smiled through messages that were never answered, birthdays forgotten, and days when even breathing felt like something I had to earn. I smiled at people who had no idea they had hurt me. I smiled while sitting in rooms that felt colder than empty ones. Some days I would catch my reflection and not recognize myself, not because I looked different, but because the girl staring back seemed like a stranger. She looked fine. She looked strong. But inside, it felt like I was made of shattered glass, just barely held together by the hope that maybe, someday, someone would see past the smile and stay anyway. I remember once, standing in front of someone I cared about deeply. I had just finished laughing at something they said. It was real laughter, or at least it sounded like it. But the second I turned away, I felt this quiet ache rise in my chest, like I had betrayed myself again, like I had let another piece of me go unseen. There was this scar on my arm, faint, barely visible now, but it was from a time I never talk about. I used to trace it with my fingers when no one was watching. Not because I wanted to relive the pain, but because it reminded me that it was real, that I was real, even when I felt invisible to everyone else. Each smile I gave the world was like makeup covering bruises that didn't show on the skin. I wore them out of habit, out of fear, out of survival. I smiled so no one would ask questions. I smiled so they would believe I was okay. I smiled so I wouldn't fall apart in front of people who didn't know what to do with broken things. And yet, in all of that pretending, there was a part of me still hoping someone would look close enough, care deep enough, listen long enough to see that behind the smile was someone quietly begging not to be left alone. Kindness didn't arrive loudly. It didn't burst in and demand to be noticed. It came softly, like a whisper I didn't know I was waiting for, in moments that didn't need to be big, a question that wasn't shallow, a silence that didn't rush to fill the space, a look that didn't turn away. I wasn't ready to believe it at first. After years of masking pain with smiles, it felt dangerous to be seen. But slowly, gently, I started to loosen my grip. to let the corners of my mouth fall, to let my eyes tell the truth. And in that rawness, in that quiet unmasking, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe, not fixed, not fully healed. Just safe enough to not pretend, and somehow that was enough to begin again. There was a time when trust came easily to me, when I believed people meant what they said, that promises were meant to be kept, and that hearts were safe in the hands of those who claimed to care. But time changes things, and somewhere along the way, trust became something I stopped reaching for, like a word I once knew the meaning of, but could no longer pronounce without pain. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being hurt. It's slow. It seeps in quietly, one disappointment at a time. A lie here, a silence there. Someone saying I'm not like the others, and then proving in their own way that they were exactly the same. I used to give people the benefit of the doubt. I used to hand over parts of myself with open palms, but every time someone dropped what I offered, the space where trust used to live began to close. Eventually, I stopped offering anything at all. I remember sitting in a crowded room once, surrounded by laughter and movement, and feeling more alone than I had in months. Someone next to me asked how I was doing. I smiled, like always, and said, "I'm fine." They nodded, satisfied with the answer, and turned away. They didn't notice the way my hands were shaking under the table. They didn't see the tightness in my jaw, or the way my eyes kept scanning the room, hoping someone would ask again. Really ask. It wasn't just strangers or temporary people. Sometimes it was the ones I thought would stay, the ones who made me feel safe for a little while until they changed their minds or just faded. I tried not to take it personally, but how could I not? When someone looks you in the eyes and tells you you matter and then walks away without warning, how do you not start to believe you're the problem? After enough of that, you stop showing people the real parts of you. You give them the version that smiles on cue, that says the right things, that keeps things light and easy. Because being honest means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means giving someone the power to hurt you. And I had already learned what that felt like. So trust became something I admired from a distance, like a language I no longer spoke. I'd see people open up, lean on each other, fall into something soft, and I'd wonder how they did it without shaking. How they weren't terrified of being let down, how they still believed someone would stay. Sometimes I would write things down just to get them out of my chest, not to share, not to send, just to remember that I still had feelings, even if I didn't know what to do with them. I'd write about the people who made me feel safe, even for a moment, the ones who didn't stay, but still left a trace of something good. It reminded me that not every ending had to be cruel. Some were just incomplete. I used to think trust had to be earned all at once, in a grand gesture or perfect promise. But I've started to learn it can be built quietly, too, in small, consistent ways, in someone showing up when they say they will, in someone listening without rushing to fix, in someone noticing when your smile feels different and gently asking what's underneath it. Kindness did that for me, not the loud kind, the soft, patient kind that didn't ask for anything in return. It didn't expect me to open up right away. It didn't press or push or disappear when things got hard. It just stayed, and slowly my walls, those ones I thought were permanent, started to shift. I'm not saying I trust easily now. I don't. There are still days when I question every good thing, waiting for it to fall apart. But I've learned to leave a little room for hope, for healing, for the chance that not everyone is here to break me. And maybe that's enough for now, because even forgotten words can be remembered in time. It's strange how you can go so long without expecting anything good that when it finally shows up, you almost don't recognize it. That's how it felt the first time kindness found me. And not the kind you earn or explain, but the kind that comes without needing to know your story first. I was sitting on the back steps of a building I didn't even want to be in, watching the street fade into its usual evening quiet. My hands were cold, not from the weather, but from the kind of stillness that lives in your body when you've been holding too much for too long. I remember feeling like I was just suspended, like I was waiting for something to fall apart, even though I wasn't sure what was still holding together. That's when a voice broke the silence, not loud, just simple, a hello followed by nothing more than a quiet presence. I didn't know what to do with it. I looked up, expecting a reason, a question, maybe even a joke to break the awkwardness, but none of that came. Just someone sitting nearby, not asking anything of me, not wanting to fix me, just being there. I'd been so used to people needing context. They always wanted a story before they gave you their softness, a reason before they offered their time, but this didn't feel like that. It wasn't performative, it wasn't temporary. It didn't ask for an explanation of why I looked tired, or why I'd been sitting out in the cold by myself. It didn't try to label me or lighten the mood. It just stayed. For a while, I said nothing. I didn't trust it, not fully. I thought maybe it was a moment that would pass, like all the others, but it didn't. The next day, and the day after that, I started seeing small things. A warm cup left where I sat. A note scribbled on a napkin, hope today feels lighter. No name, no expectation, just these soft reminders that someone noticed I existed. And for me, that was everything. I didn't respond right away. Part of me felt like I didn't deserve it, like I had to figure myself out before I could accept something so gentle. But kindness doesn't wait for you to feel worthy. It doesn't hold a mirror to your brokenness and ask for proof you've healed. It simply comes quietly and patiently, and it sits with you in the dark until you're ready to see light again. And that's what happened. Little by little, I let it in, not in grand ways. I still kept most things close to my chest. I still flinched when conversations felt too personal, but I smile, genuinely, for the first time in what felt like forever, and it wasn't a mask this time. It came from something real, something soft that was slowly growing inside me. What I realized is that kindness, when it's true, doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need to be earned or justified. It shows up even when you're quiet, even when you're distant, even when all you've ever known is how to hide. And I had spent so much of my life hiding, behind forced laughs, behind words like I'm fine, behind the belief that if I let people see the mess in me, they'd walk away like others had. But this didn't feel like someone preparing to leave. It felt like someone willing to stay, even if I never explained why I was so guarded. I used to think love came only after proving yourself, after being happy enough, stable enough, easy enough to be around. But kindness taught me that you don't need to be perfect to be worthy of care. You don't even need to be okay. You just need to be. There were nights I still broke down in silence, still let old fears creep back in. But knowing someone was near not to fix it, just to be present, made those nights a little easier. And slowly, I started believing in softness again, not just from others, but from myself. I stopped blaming myself for needing people. I stopped apologizing for the ways I felt deeply. I stopped seeing my pain as something shameful. Kindness didn't rescue me. It didn't erase the scars or rewrite the past, but it did something gentler. It stayed. And in staying, it reminded me that not everyone needs a reason to care. And somehow that was enough. There was a time when I thought pain would always be the loudest thing in my life, that it would keep echoing, no matter how many years passed, no matter how far I tried to run from it. It had settled into me like a second skin, something familiar, something constant. I got used to it in a way, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what it felt like to live without it. I carried that hurt everywhere. It shaped how I walked into rooms, how I avoided eye contact, how I answered questions with half-truths just to keep people from getting too close. I wasn't trying to be distant. I was just trying to stay safe. Letting people in meant giving them the chance to leave, and I wasn't sure I could survive being left one more time. There were places in me that felt permanently closed, like I had locked doors inside myself and thrown away the keys. I thought I'd built a kind of peace in that quiet, but it wasn't peace, it was numbness. I mistook it for strength because it looked like control, but underneath I was tired, so tired of pretending I didn't need anyone, so tired of hiding how deeply I felt things. And then something changed. It didn't happen in a flash or with some dramatic turning point. It happened slowly, in ways I almost didn't notice, in the way someone remembered the smallest details I shared, in how they stayed in conversations even when I went quiet, in how they didn't flinch when my voice cracked or when my eyes gave away more than I meant to show. They didn't ask me to be okay. They didn't need me to be easy. They just stayed. I didn't know what to call it at first. It didn't feel like the love I had seen in movies or read in books. It didn't come with fireworks or grand declarations. It came with patience, with quiet mornings and soft words and the kind of presence that doesn't demand anything from you. It came with space to breathe, to stumble, to not have all the answers. And somewhere in that space, warmth began to grow. Not all at once. The hurt didn't disappear overnight. There were still days when I would wake up and feel the familiar weight of everything I had carried for so long. But something was different. The pain wasn't alone anymore. It was slowly being wrapped in something softer, not erased, but held. I remember looking around one day and realizing I wasn't constantly bracing for something to go wrong. I wasn't waiting for silence to come where connection had lived. I wasn't afraid to laugh too loudly or cry too openly, and that shift, so quiet, so gentle, meant more than I ever thought it could. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I was living. I was letting light in through the cracks I had spent years trying to seal shut, and it didn't make me weaker. It made me real. It made me whole. I started to understand that healing doesn't always look like forgetting. It doesn't always mean the pain disappears. Sometimes it means the pain learns how to live beside something better. And in that balance, there's strength, there's growth, there's grace. What surprised me most was how naturally it happened once I stopped running. Once I stopped trying to be untouched by what I had been through. The more I allowed myself to feel to be seen, the more warmth I found waiting for me, not from the world all at once, but from people who mattered. People who showed up without needing to understand every part of me, but who were willing to stay long enough to try. I used to think I had to fight for every bit of love or comfort I received, that I had to prove myself worthy of even the smallest bit of care. But I was wrong, because the truth is, some things come gently. Some things arrive without conditions, and when they do, they make space inside you that you didn't even know was empty. Now, when I think about the places that used to hurt the most, I don't feel only pain. I feel something warmer, something steady, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can soften, that even the most guarded hearts can learn to open again. because sometimes warmth grows exactly where the hurt once lived. For the longest time, I thought love was supposed to save me, that it would arrive like some kind of miracle, loud, certain, all-consuming, and sweep away every ache, every quiet moment of doubt I had ever known. I waited for it like people wait for storms to pass or the sun to rise after a long night. I believed that once it came, everything else would make sense. But that kind of love never came. Instead, life brought me versions of love that burned out quickly, ones that made promises too big to keep, ones that looked beautiful from a distance but crumbled when I leaned in too closely. I kept reaching, hoping, trying to make those flickers last. I gave and gave, thinking if I just held on tighter, they wouldn't leave. But they did, and each time it left me with a little less of myself. I was tired, not just from heartbreak, but from the hope I kept trying to rebuild after each one. I started believing that maybe I was just meant to go through life this way. Quietly, cautiously, always wondering if I was too much to love or not enough to stay for. I became good at pretending I didn't need anyone. I told myself I was fine on my own, and maybe I was. But deep down, I still wanted something steady, something safe, and then something changed. It didn't look like what I had imagined love to be. It wasn't grand or overwhelming. It didn't arrive with fireworks or sweep me off my feet. It came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. It showed up when I wasn't trying to be seen, when I wasn't trying to prove anything or earn affection. It showed up in the stillness, in the softness, in the spaces I had kept hidden for so long. It didn't try to fix me. That was the difference. It didn't look at my broken parts and try to rearrange them into something prettier. It didn't demand that I be cheerful or strong or whole. It didn't pull away when I fell silent or when my eyes welled with tears I didn't explain. It didn't need to understand everything about me to stay. It just stayed. At first, I didn't know what to do with that. I kept waiting for the shift, for the moment it would vanish like all the others. I braced myself for the distance I had grown used to, the silence that always came after someone said they'd be there. But it didn't come, and slowly I let my guard down, not all at once, just a little, enough to let the quiet in. That's where the healing began, not in someone rescuing me, not in some perfect love that made me forget the pain, but in the way this presence made room for me to be exactly as I was. I could be soft or guarded, joyful or weary, open or closed, and still I wasn't pushed away. I wasn't made to feel like a burden or a puzzle that needed solving. There were days I still struggled, days when the weight of old pain came rushing back without warning, days when I doubted everything, including myself. But even then, I wasn't alone. Love didn't disappear when I was at my lowest. It didn't leave when I couldn't offer anything in return. It stayed, quietly, patiently, and in that staying, something inside me began to believe again, not in fairy tales, not in saving, but in something more honest. I started to understand that real love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it's found in the way someone notices you without needing you to speak, in how they offer silence without it feeling empty, in how they remember the little things, in how they stay, even when you're hard to hold. I didn't need someone to rescue me. I needed someone to walk beside me, to hold space for all that I was carrying without trying to take it from me. And that's what I found. A kind of love that wasn't afraid of the shadows, that didn't need me to shine all the time to be worthy of care. Now, when I look back on everything I survived, I don't wish any of it away, because it led me here to something real, to something that doesn't demand perfection, but welcomes presence. Because love didn't rescue me. It stayed and healed, Thank you for listening to my story. It hasn't been easy to share, but I hope it reminds you that healing doesn't always come in the way we expect. Sometimes love isn't about being saved, it's about someone simply choosing to stay, even when things are hard. If you're carrying pain right now, know that you're not alone, and kindness can find you when you least expect it. Take your time, be gentle with yourself, and remember, real love doesn't rush, it waits and heals. Until next time, take care of your heart,